Maria stood in the middle of her new apartment, boxes scattered around her feet. A sense of relief mixed with apprehension filling her chest. The place was small, even a bit rundown, but it was hers. After the turmoil of the divorce, she needed a fresh start, and this tiny, affordable apartment in the heart of the city seemed like the perfect opportunity to rebuild her life. She glanced around, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the old creaky floorboards, and the dim lighting that barely illuminated the room. The landlord had mentioned that the building was over 100 years old, and it showed. The thick walls seemed to hold memories, their silence heavy, as if they were listening. But Maria pushed the thought aside, deciding to focus on the positives. The rent was cheap, and the location was convenient. After a few hours of unpacking, she took a break and decided to explore the building. The narrow hallways were lined with faded, patterned carpet, and the air was thick with the musty scent of age. She passed a few closed doors, hearing faint sounds from behind them, low murmurs, the distant clatter of dishes, but saw no one. The building seemed almost abandoned, a stark contrast to the bustling city outside. Returning to her apartment, she felt a chill run down her spine as she closed the door behind her. The room felt colder than before, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. She shook it off, telling herself it was just her imagination playing tricks on her after a long day. She settled into bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin, and closed her eyes, hoping for a restful sleep in her new home. But in the dead of night, she awoke to a sound, a faint whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind whistling through the old windows, but as she listened, the whisper grew clearer, more distinct. It was soft, almost soothing, but unnervingly persistent. "Maria!" Her heart skipped a beat. She sat up, straining to hear, her eyes scanning the dark room. The whisper seemed to come from the walls themselves, a quiet murmur that sent a chill down her spine. She turned on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with dim light, and listened. The sound stopped. She sat there for a few moments, heart pounding, trying to rationalize what she had heard. Maybe it was just a trick of the old building, a creak or a groan from the aging pipes. Deciding that exhaustion was probably playing tricks on her mind, she lay back down, pulling the blankets tighter around her. But the sense of unease lingered, and she found herself listening intently to the silence, as if waiting for the whisper to return. Minutes passed, and just as her eyes began to close, she heard it again, faint but unmistakable. "Maria!" Her breath caught in her throat. She got up, her feet touching the cold wooden floor, and slowly approached the wall where she thought the sound was coming from. Pressing her ear against it, she heard nothing but the faint hum of the city outside. Her fingers brushed against the old wallpaper, feeling its rough texture, and for a moment she considered knocking back, but she stopped herself. It was late, and she didn't want to appear crazy to her new neighbors. With a shaky sigh, she returned to bed, telling herself it was nothing. Just the old building settling, the wind, or perhaps a neighbor talking in their sleep. But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that someone was watching her from within the walls. The night passed slowly, the whispers fading into the background, but the sense of unease never left her. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, Maria was already awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what secrets this old apartment might hold. In the days that followed, Maria tried to settle into her new life, pushing aside the strange experience of that first night. She focused on her new job, unpacked more boxes, and decorated the apartment with framed photos and warm, inviting colors. But no matter how much she tried to make the space feel like home, a lingering unease gnawed at her. Every night, the whispers returned. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible, but as the days passed, they grew louder, more distinct. The sound seemed to emanate from within the walls, as if someone were trapped there, desperately trying to get her attention. "Maria, help me." The whisper sent a shiver down her spine every time she heard it. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the pipes, or perhaps a draft in the old building. But the voice seemed too clear, too intentional. It wasn't just random noise. There was a pattern, a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. One night, unable to bear it any longer, Maria decided to investigate. She pressed her ear against the wall in different rooms, trying to pinpoint the source. As she moved from the bedroom to the living room, she felt a cold spot. A sudden, intense chill that made her breath fog in the air. She instinctively pulled back, fear prickling at her skin. The whispers grew louder that night, clearer. She could make out words now, not just her name. Words that she hadn't heard in years, things only she would know. Remember the lake? The accident? Her heart raced as memories flooded back. Memories she had tried hard to forget. A summer day at the lake, a tragic accident, a sense of helplessness that had haunted her ever since. But how could anyone know about that? She had never told a soul in this city, not even her ex-husband. She began to feel paranoid, her anxiety growing with every passing hour. She checked the locks on her doors and windows obsessively, convinced someone was trying to play a cruel trick on her. She asked the neighbors if they had heard anything strange, but they all shook their heads, looking at her with a mix of concern and confusion. The whispers, it seemed, were meant only for her. Each night, the voice grew bolder, whispering secrets she had buried deep, ones that cut into her like knives. And each night, the chill in her apartment seemed to grow, creeping deeper into her bones. She started losing sleep, her eyes dark with exhaustion, her nerves frayed. She began to dread the night, knowing that the whispers would come again. One evening, after another sleepless night, she decided to confront the building's landlord, an elderly man who lived on the ground floor. She knocked on his door, and after a few moments, he appeared, his expression weary but polite. "Have you ever heard strange noises?" she asked, hesitant, not wanting to seem irrational. "Like whispers?" The landlord's face darkened for a moment, but then he forced a smile. "Old buildings like this, they make a lot of noise," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "Pipes, walls settling, you get used to it." But Maria noticed the way his hands trembled slightly, how he glanced back toward the hallway, as if afraid something might be listening. She left, more unsettled than before, and as she climbed back up to her apartment, she felt the familiar chill wrapping around her like an unwelcome embrace. That night, the whispers became almost unbearable. They were not just whispers now, they were cries, pleading and desperate. "Maria, don't ignore me." She covered her ears with her hands, but the voice seemed to seep into her mind, echoing around her skull. Her heartbeat quickened, and she felt tears prickling in her eyes. She sat on the edge of her bed, trembling, feeling more alone and afraid than she had ever felt in her life. Somewhere in the darkness, the whisper came again, louder than ever. "Maria, I need you." And this time, she was certain there was no mistake. Someone, or something, was calling her, and it knew her deepest fears. Maria could feel the walls closing in around her. Each night, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, and with them came a sensation of suffocating dread. She knew she couldn't keep ignoring it. Something was wrong in this place, terribly wrong, and she needed answers. Determined to find out what was happening, Maria began to search every corner of her apartment. She ran her hands along the old, faded wallpaper, tapped on the wooden panels, and checked the tiny crawl spaces in the closets. Days passed, and she found nothing unusual, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden there, just out of sight. Then, one night, as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to steady her nerves, she noticed something odd. The mirror was slightly crooked. She reached out to adjust it, and the moment she touched it, the mirror swung open, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Her heart pounded in her chest as she cautiously peered inside. There, covered in dust, was a small, leather-bound book. She pulled it out carefully, her fingers trembling, and wiped away the thick layer of grime. The cover was worn, the leather cracked with age, but the name on it was still legible, Elena. Maria's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary book. It was a diary. She opened it slowly, the old pages yellowed and fragile. The handwriting was delicate, looping, almost like a whisper itself, and the first date was from over 30 years ago. She began to read. At first, the entries were mundane. Elena wrote about her daily life, her dreams of becoming a painter, her love for the city, and her struggles to make ends meet. But as Maria continued reading, the tone shifted. Elena began to write about strange occurrences in the apartment, a chill that lingered in the air, objects moving on their own, and finally, the whispers. "I hear them at night," one entry read, soft at first, but then louder, more insistent. "They know my name. They know my secrets." Maria felt a chill run down her spine as she read the words. It was like looking into a mirror. Elena's experiences mirrored her own, almost exactly. The woman had lived in this very apartment, tormented by the same whispers, the same inexplicable cold, the same feeling of being watched. Elena's entries grew increasingly frantic, her writing more erratic. She wrote about how she tried to ignore the whispers at first, but they became too loud, too persistent. She heard them in her dreams, felt their cold breath on her skin, even saw shadows moving across her walls. She wrote about feeling like she was losing her mind, that something was pulling her into the walls, into the darkness. "I'm not alone," another entry read. "There's something here with me, something that wants me. I can feel it getting closer. I have to find a way out." The final entry was almost illegible, scrawled in a frantic hand. "If anyone finds this," it read, "please help me. Don't let it take you too. It knows. It knows everything." Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Elena's words resonated deep within her, amplifying her own fears. The whispers, the cold, the unsettling presence, it had all happened before. But what had become of Elena? Why had she vanished without a trace? Maria closed the diary and looked around the room, her eyes wide with fear. It was as if she could still feel Elena's presence, hear her soft, desperate cries echoing through the walls. She realized that Elena might still be here, trapped, trying to reach out to her. She felt a mix of fear and empathy. If Elena had been driven mad by whatever haunted this place, was Maria destined for the same fate? She glanced back at the mirror, half expecting to see a face staring back at her that wasn't her own. The whispers returned that night, louder than ever, and now they seemed to take on a different tone, more pleading, almost human. She could hear the emotion, the despair in the voice, and she knew it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. "Maria, find me. Help me." Maria knew she had to do something. She couldn't just ignore it anymore. This wasn't just a ghost story, it was real. And Elena was reaching out, desperate, from the darkness. With newfound determination, Maria decided to search for more clues. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was hidden somewhere in the building, waiting for her to find it. She needed to know what had happened to Elena, and why she was being drawn into the same nightmare. She placed the diary carefully back into the hidden compartment, her mind racing. She would start her search in the one place she hadn't dared to go before, the basement. Taking a deep breath, Maria steeled herself for what lay ahead. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew one thing for certain. The whispers weren't going to stop until she did. Maria stood at the top of the narrow staircase leading down to the basement, her hand trembling on the railing. The building's dim lighting barely reached the bottom, where shadows seemed to pool and gather, swallowing any hint of detail. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the fear that gripped her, and began her descent. With each step, the air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. It was as if the basement had its own atmosphere, cut off from the rest of the world above. The old wooden stairs creaked under her weight, their groans echoing through the empty space like distant cries. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, a rapid drumbeat that seemed to match the rhythm of her footsteps. When she reached the bottom, she paused, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. The basement was vast and cluttered, filled with forgotten furniture, old boxes, and remnants of the building's long history. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of dampness lingered. In the far corner, she saw the wall, covered in strange symbols, painted in a dark, almost black substance. She approached slowly, the cold growing more intense with each step. The symbols seemed to pulse in the dim light, almost like they were alive, like they were watching her. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface of the wall. She could feel a slight vibration, a faint hum that seemed to emanate from deep within. And then she saw it, a dark stain, shaped vaguely like a distorted face, just as she had seen before. The features were warped, twisted in agony or fear, and for a moment she thought she saw it move. She gasped, stepping back, her breath catching in her throat. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. It was Elena's voice, clearer than ever before. "Maria, help me, please." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The voice was so close, almost as if Elena were standing right beside her. She turned around, half expecting to see someone there, but the basement was empty. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of movement, any shadow that might explain what she was hearing. But there was nothing. Just the still, suffocating darkness and the oppressive cold. Gathering her courage, Maria turned back to the wall. She had come this far, she couldn't turn back now. She ran her fingers over the symbols, feeling their cold, strange texture. She traced the lines, trying to make sense of them, to find some pattern, some clue. Her fingers moved to the stain, and as she touched it, she felt a jolt, like a static shock, but deeper, almost inside her mind. She pulled her hand back, trembling, but then she heard the voice again, this time more desperate, more insistent. "Maria, don't leave me. It's here. It's waiting." A wave of fear washed over her, but there was something else too, a sense of urgency and need to help. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to Elena, felt compelled to understand what had happened to her. She knew she had to stay, had to search for more clues, no matter how terrifying the basement felt. She looked around and spotted a small, old desk covered in dust. Maybe there were more records, more clues hidden among the debris. As she moved toward it, a sharp, cold wind blew through the basement, making her shiver. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. She heard a faint rustling, like something moving just beyond her sight. With a racing heart, she opened the desk drawers, rummaging through old papers, receipts, and forgotten notes. But there was nothing that made sense. Frustration bubbled inside her, mixing with the fear that gripped her every move. Then, from behind her, she heard a soft, distant creaking, like a door opening, somewhere deeper in the basement. She froze, holding her breath, straining to hear. The sound was faint but unmistakable, and it sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through her veins. She turned slowly, her flashlight beam sweeping across the room, illuminating the dark corners, the strange shadows. The creaking continued, and she felt the urge to run, to flee back to the safety of her apartment. But something inside her held her there, rooted to the spot, her curiosity and fear intertwined. The voice came again, softer this time, almost a whisper. "Maria, it's coming. Hurry." She knew she couldn't stay here much longer. Whatever was in the basement with her, it was getting closer. She took a deep breath, backing away from the desk, her eyes never leaving the darkness. She would have to come back better prepared. But for now, she needed to leave, to gather her thoughts, to plan her next move. With one last glance at the strange wall, Maria turned and fled up the stairs, the cold air biting at her heels, the whispers echoing in her mind. Maria couldn't shake the chill of the basement as she climbed the stairs back to her apartment. Even with the door closed and locked behind her, the cold seemed to cling to her skin, sinking deep into her bones. The whispers had followed her, growing fainter but still there, hovering at the edge of her consciousness. She knew she was running out of time. She spent the next few hours pacing her apartment, her mind racing with possibilities. She had to find out what had happened to Elena. She needed to understand what was haunting this place, what was trying to reach out to her. She knew the answer lay in the basement, behind that strange wall and its mysterious symbols. But she couldn't go back down there, not alone, not without a plan. That night, as the rain began to pound against the windows and the wind howled through the narrow streets, Maria decided she had waited long enough. She would confront whatever was down there, face it head on, and put an end to the torment that had consumed her nights. Armed with a flashlight and a heavy metal candlestick she had found in the apartment, she made her way back down to the basement. The air felt even colder than before, and the darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive. She forced herself to take one step after another, ignoring the fear clawing at her insides. When she reached the basement, she immediately felt the presence. The cold was almost unbearable, like a freezing fog wrapping around her body. The symbols on the wall seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, pulsing with a sickly energy. She approached them cautiously, her hand gripping the candlestick tightly. The whispers returned, louder now, filled with urgency and fear. "Maria, don't go closer. It's waiting." But she couldn't stop. She had to know. She raised the flashlight, shining it on the wall, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. A crack running down the center of the wall, barely visible in the flickering light. It looked like the wall had been sealed, closed off hastily, as if hiding something behind it. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached out to touch the crack. The moment her fingers brushed against it, she felt a shock, a jolt of electricity that made her gasp. She pulled back, but then, with a deep breath, she pushed harder, digging her fingers into the crack. The wall seemed to give slightly, and she heard a soft creaking sound like old wood under strain. And then the voice changed. No longer Elena's soft, desperate tone, but something darker, more guttural, almost a growl. "Maria, no, leave." She hesitated, but only for a moment. She couldn't let fear control her, not now. With a surge of determination, she drove the candlestick into the crack, using it as a lever to pry the wall apart. The wood splintered and cracked under the pressure, and a piece broke off, revealing a dark void behind it. She shined her flashlight into the hole, peering inside. The light barely penetrated the darkness, but she could see something moving, something shifting in the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the space behind the wall was much larger than she had thought, like a hidden room. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, and the room went dark. Maria's heart raced, panic setting in. She smacked the flashlight, willing it to work, and after a few moments, the light sputtered back to life. She aimed it back at the hole in the wall, and what she saw made her blood run cold. A face, pale and distorted, stared back at her from the darkness. The features were twisted in agony, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth stretched in a silent scream. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The face didn't move, but she could feel its eyes on her, cold and hungry. The whispers filled the air again, louder, almost a roar now. Mingled voices, some pleading, some angry, all echoing in her mind. "Maria, Maria, you shouldn't have come." She felt a force pulling at her, drawing her toward the wall, toward the darkness behind it. Her feet seemed rooted to the spot, her body frozen in place. She struggled to move, to break free, but the force grew stronger, dragging her closer to the crack. Desperation surged through her, and she raised the candlestick, swinging it wildly at the wall. The impact sent a shockwave through her arm, and the wall shuddered, the crack widening slightly. She swung again, harder this time with all the strength she could muster. The wall began to crumble, pieces falling away, revealing more of the hidden space behind it. And then she saw it. A figure, moving slowly toward her. A dark shape with hollow eyes and outstretched hands. She could feel its malevolence, its hunger, and she knew in that moment that it was not Elena. It was something else, something older, something filled with a deep, insatiable rage. The whispers became screams, filling her head, deafening her, and she felt herself being pulled toward the figure, her body moving against her will. She screamed, swinging the candlestick again, smashing it against the wall. The impact sent a crack through the air, and suddenly the figure stopped, its eyes wide with shock. For a moment, everything was silent, and then with a shudder the wall collapsed, a gust of icy wind rushing past her, carrying with it a sound like a distant wail. Maria staggered back, gasping for breath, her heart racing. The figure was gone, the room was still, but the whispers remained, softer now, almost like a sigh. "Elena, thank you." She felt a wave of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. The air was still cold, the darkness still deep, and she knew that whatever she had released, it was far from gone. She turned and fled up the stairs, not daring to look back, the whispers following her into the night. Back in her apartment, Maria slammed the door shut, her hands trembling, breath coming in ragged gasps. Her heart was still racing from what she had seen, what she had felt down in the basement. She tried to steady herself, her mind racing with questions, but one thing was clear. Whatever was in this building, whatever she had released, was not gone. It was still here, lurking in the shadows, waiting. She paced the room, clutching the candlestick, her only weapon. The air felt thick and heavy, almost like it was pressing down on her. She could still hear the whispers, softer now, but ever present, weaving through her thoughts like a distant melody. Elena, help, gone. Maria couldn't tell if the whispers were real or just in her head. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the diary she had left on the table. The name Elena seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, like a beacon calling her back to the mystery she had tried so desperately to solve. She grabbed the diary, flipping through the pages with frantic hands. There had to be something she missed, some clue, some hint of what Elena had faced, of what had truly happened in this building. As she scanned the last entries, something caught her eye, a smudged note at the very bottom of the final page, almost as if it had been added hastily. "It's not just me. It wants more. It's feeding, waiting." Her breath caught in her throat. The realization struck her like a blow to the chest. This entity, whatever it was, wasn't just a ghost trapped in a wall. It was something darker, something that thrived on fear, on suffering. It had fed on Elena's terror, and now it was hungry for more. Maria's mind raced. If it was feeding, then she was in danger. Real, immediate danger. But so were the others. The neighbors she had barely met, the people who lived in this building, unknowingly sharing space with something malevolent and insatiable. She stood up, clutching the diary tightly. She needed to warn them, to tell them to leave, to get out while they still could. But as she moved toward the door, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, the cold seeping into her bones like ice. The lights flickered, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Maria, stay, don't leave." Her hand froze on the doorknob, the metal biting into her skin like frost. She felt the presence again, stronger now, closer. She could almost feel its breath on her neck, its fingers brushing against her hair. Her heartbeat quickened, a mix of fear and defiance coursing through her veins. She knew she had a choice. She could leave, save herself, and abandon the others to whatever fate awaited them. Or she could stay, confront the darkness once and for all, and try to stop it from taking any more lives. Taking a deep breath, she turned the doorknob, feeling the cold metal against her skin. The whispers swirled around her, louder, angrier, almost desperate. "Maria, no, you can't." But she ignored them. She had made her choice. She would not let the darkness win. With a firm grip on the candlestick and the diary clutched to her chest, she stepped into the hallway, ready to face whatever waited in the shadows. Maria left her apartment door ajar as she stepped out into the hallway. The lights flickered above, casting long, wavering shadows on the cracked walls. She could feel the cold creeping up from the basement, seeping through the floors, as if the building itself was breathing in icy, shallow gasps. She moved quickly, knocking on her neighbors' doors, calling out to them. Her voice was strained, her words urgent. "You have to leave. It's not safe here. Please, just get out while you can." But the hallway remained eerily silent. No doors opened, no footsteps echoed in response. It was as if the building had swallowed her voice, muffling her cries in its ancient, hungry walls. She felt a wave of panic rising in her chest. Had she already waited too long? Had it already begun to feed again? The whispers grew louder, filling the hallway, bouncing off the walls in a chorus of desperation and rage. "Maria, go back. It's too late." She felt a tremor beneath her feet, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the very foundation of the building. The walls groaned and creaked, as if under immense pressure. She turned toward the stairs, intending to leave, to flee to safety, but something held her in place. A compulsion. A pull she couldn't resist. A door at the far end of the hallway creaked open slowly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Darkness spilled out from the room beyond, thick and impenetrable, and she could feel the malevolence radiating from it like a wave of cold. She took a step back, clutching the candlestick tighter. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. The whispers had softened, now just a low murmur, like someone speaking from far away, through layers of mist. "Maria, come closer." Against her better judgment, she felt her feet move forward, one step, then another. The pull was irresistible, drawing her toward the open doorway, toward the darkness that seemed to swallow all light. Her mind screamed for her to stop, to turn back, but her body moved as if under someone else's control. And then she saw it, a figure standing just inside the doorway, shrouded in shadow. The outline was familiar, the face obscured, but she knew deep down who it was. "Elena," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, but Maria felt a wave of emotion, sorrow, fear, a longing so deep it cut into her like a knife. She stepped closer, reaching out with one hand, her fingers trembling. "Elena, are you still here?" The figure shifted, the shadows moving around it, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a smile, sad and resigned. The whispers faded into a single, clear voice, soft and gentle. "Maria, thank you." The darkness seemed to pulse, growing deeper, thicker, and then, with a sudden rush, it collapsed inward, pulling the figure away, closing the door with a resounding thud. The hallway was quiet again, the cold receding like a breath released. Maria stood there, panting, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands still reaching out toward the now closed door. She turned slowly, her senses on high alert, and began to make her way back to her apartment. The whispers had ceased, the cold was lifting, and for the first time in days, she felt a strange sense of peace. As she reached her door, she paused, looking back down the hallway, half expecting something to change, something to happen. But nothing did. She stepped inside her apartment, closing the door behind her, and leaned against it, closing her eyes. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had been haunting her, haunting this building, had finally found some measure of peace. But as she opened her eyes and looked into the mirror on the wall, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the reflection, was a face she didn't recognize, smiling back at her.